Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Series 11 story, The Witchfinders, written by Joy Wilkinson and is directed by Sally Abrahamson. Sorry if I've completely butchered that last name. This is another pseudo-historical in the Doctor Who franchise, another popular genre in the Series 11 era of Doctor Who, in which you have a historical event, a historical setting, and it has mainly focuses on historical, but however it's pseudo-historical, which means that there are also sci-fi elements and deals with extraterrestrials, aliens, or science fictional story plot points, and being the main focus of the narrative. And this one is a very unique aspect in Doctor Who history, as it is the first time wherein the gender of the Doctor, particularly the Doctor being female, is actually an important part within the narrative per se. It's not really like a massive deal, but it is a hindrance to her in trying to get to solve the problems. And that is actually a really interesting dynamic. One thing that a lot of people were hoping for when Series 11 was coming out is that the Doctor's gender wasn't brought up a lot. And at the moment of this, before this episode aired, that is true. The gender of the Doctor never implied or anything on what made her a character. The only really elements we got a few little jokes here and there about the Doctor previously being a man, most noticeably in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, when Yaz called her Madam, and the Doctor then is like, oh my god, I'm a woman now. That's so cool. And also in The Demons of the Punjab, when the Doctor had a Hana tattoo and is like, oh wow, that's amazing, I could never have done this when I was a man. So it has been brought up. I mean, of course, it's one of what makes this Doctor particularly so different from the Doctors, is that she is the first female Doctor. But it's the first time in the series where that actually becomes a part of the narrative, a part of the plot. Also, this story features the historical figure King James I, or King James the Sixth, if you're from Scotland. We'll talk about it in a bit. This story is the second story in the entire Doctor Who televised chronology which was written and directed by a woman. Previously, the fifth Doctor story, Enlightenment, was the first story to be written and directed both by women. So that is actually a really big, important step in the history of Doctor Who, because, it is kind of sad that this is only the second time. Two times in all of more than 50 years of televised canonical history of Doctor Who has Doctor Who been both written and directed by a woman. You think there would be more, but no, it's not. This story was also filmed during a massive event in British time from what they call the Beast from the East, in which Britain was suffering through a massive winter storm where there's loads of snow and cold weather. So when they were filming this story, it was absolutely freezing. I remember Beast of the East. I remember not going into work in that day, and it's really mental to think that the people filming this, people acting in this story, people who were producing it and all that, had to work through this monumental event in British time, the Beast of the East. It's very strange. It's very strange. Also, like Beast of the East was 2018. How mad is that? That is absolutely mental. But anyway, the story takes place in, I can't remember exactly when. It's either the 1400s or the 1500s. Basically, just after Queen Elizabeth I had passed away. At least she's been dead for quite a while, actually, I think, from when this story started. But that connects as well to Day of the Doctor, because from that story's point of view, this story is only a few years in that story's future in terms of Earth's chronological history. I know, weird to think, this story is technically a sequel in that regard, because it follows King James I, who succeeded Queen Elizabeth I in the monarchy. as she died with no children. So her greatest cousin was first in line to the throne, who was in fact King James. And during this time in history, there were these witch trials. This story is set near the famous hill Pendon Hill. It's a famous place which I've always known because I was with my partner at the time. She was a massive fan of a show called Ghost Adventures and Most Haunted, and they talk about Pendle Hill a lot, and it's supposed to be like a spot for supernatural activity. So I've always been aware of Pendle Hill. But this story, it's about it, but it's not really about it. It's about like what's going on around it and the famous witch trials that happened. Basically, years ago, they used to believe that witches were the signs of demons and that they would kill basically anybody who suspected that they were a witch. And they would do this by tying up to a great tree, a branch of a great tree, like a stud, ditch them into a well, into a river, and drown them. If they drowned, it meant that they weren't the witch, but they were dead, so who cares? But if they didn't drown, then they were a witch, and they would be then burnt and killed. So either way, if you were a woman around this time, you would basically be dead if you were even suspected of being a witch. There were historically male witches, at least according to those times, but commonly it was females that were targeted as being witches. And the story, what I really like at the start of the story is essentially the doctor, she goes in, she's enjoying her time in this set, and she does apple bobbing at one point, and then the atmosphere suddenly turns and they've all been summoned to the lake where they see the witch trial. The doctor tells her friends the greatest important part about going into the past is to not interfere with history. Only for the doctor, Ryan, Yaz and Graham to witness a witch trial. And the doctor, there's a fantastically directed scene where Jodie Whittaker basically has to just use her face to act, as essentially Yaz and Graham are the voices on her shoulder, with Graham saying it's like, right, this is a horrible event, however it is history, witch trials did happen and you can't interfere with that. Whilst Yaz is like, we cannot let an innocent person die. We can't let this woman die for being a witch, which isn't a thing. So the doctor, after taking a little bit of time, actually jumps in and gets involved in history and goes into the lake to try and save this woman's life, but she fails. And that is basically the settlement of the story, as she gives her psychic paper to Becca Savage, played by Sobham Finneran, I believe her name is. She's famously for playing the mother character in the TV show Benidorm. She was one of the main characters in the show Benidorm. A massive celebrity cast for Doctor Who. But she's not the celebrity surprise guest star. She's not the celebrity guest star in this story. That spot is saved for a much bigger actor, shall we say, in this story. We'll get on to him when we talk about the big surprise of the story. And so basically she believes that the Doctor and her friends are all famous witchfinders, and so she befriends them, even though she is the one that's been killing all of these innocent people. And the Doctor suspects that she's hiding something, and she's this murderer. And the Doctor knows she's a murderer, but she thinks that she's a murderer because she's trying to hide something particularly about her past. As the Doctor investigates, why is this woman trying to kill so many people? Of course, she believes that there are these witches, there's these crops hunting, but she thinks there's more onto her than it needs to know. And the Doctor gets taken to Becky Savage's house as Yaz befriends Willa. I can't remember if she's the daughter or the granddaughter of the woman they suspected of being a witch, who got drowned at the start of the episode. But she basically, she teams up with her and befriends her, only to find that there are these mud monsters, mud alien creatures going around possessing, or trying to possess people's bodies. Or at least they don't know about that at the moment. But that's basically what happens. She fights a tentacle mud creature, and befriends this Willa character played by Tilly Steele. Great name, by the way. Great, absolutely love that name. Who does a really great job here of playing this really innocent character whose circumstances are just thrown in her way. Her mother or grandmother, again, I can't remember, was killed right in front of her eyes by Becca Savage, who we later learn was actually raised with her as the character was cursed to be the witch, actually looked after her as if like they were her own daughter, until she suddenly betrayed him to go search for fame by marrying into a much more richer family. And she's not like anything special in terms of like, she's not a witch, she's not an alien entity, she's just a normal human being who's scared for her life, and she wants to run away, but the doctor later on convinces her. And she's a lovely character, she's really great, and you know, she puts that human perspective, that normal everyday perspective, onto the narrative. Now let's talk about this narrative a sec, because this is actually kind of not a unique, but something like, it's a nice change of pace for how most sci-fi and horror stories tackle this era in time. A lot of fiction does kind of tend, especially like fantasy, always trying to tend that like witches are real. In fact, the Doctor Who has already, this actually kind of bugs me in the story, because the Doctor is like, right, there's no witches, there's no thing. Doctor, you've met witches! The Shakespeare Code! You've met carrier knights, which were figuratively and literally witches! But I guess that's not the point of the story, because this story actually does something really unique in terms of fantasy, where it actually is like, no, these weren't witches, these are real people that died in like real, because that's actually what happened. Because witches aren't real. They're not real. But people did die believing it, because they were believed to be witches. In history basically has told us that the reason that they died was so that, like, people would accuse them of witches being ripped off so they could basically rule out the competition. A great example, I can't remember where I've heard this from, but a great example is that this woman was trialed for being a witch by a rival family that made bread. They both like made bread, and so one of them accused the other family of being a witch, and so the family were all killed, especially the females, and that basically got rid of the competition. Because when you're accused of being a witch, how do you survive that? You either drown and die, or you get burnt to a crisp if you survive this horrible process. It's a lose-lose situation, specifically targeted against women. But anyway, the Doctor tries to convince this woman that, you know, this is ridiculous. This is something that King James would not approve unless you have definitive, factual proof that they are witches. Throughout the first half of the episode, they are followed by a man with a mask. And all of a sudden in this scene, the masked man comes in and takes off his mask to reveal that he is King James the First. And now, King James the First is he's a very flamboyant, very important figure in history, especially during this time where he became really fascinated with this witch finding and this witch hunt, the fight against Satan, as he states. And it's clear in the story, and it's made very clear in the story, and it's clear in history, that the reason he really did it was because at the time he was just interested in that. It was a fad for him, and when the witch trial stopped because he just lost interest in it. He basically killed a bunch of people, again, specifically women, because he He was just interested in a part of supernatural ideology. That's pretty messed up. But the interesting thing about him is the actor, because this is the guest star. This guy is played by none other than legendary actor Alan Cummins, who's done loads of many roles. One role I know him specifically is, I believe it's GoldenEye, or it's The World's Not Enough. It's one of the James Bond films with Pierce Brosnan. And, you know, he's done a lot of roles. He's a very big actor, especially on stage. But I specifically know him from, which kind of blew me away, he was in Spy Kids. I know him most as the bad guy from the first Spy Kids movie. That, to me, is Alan Cummins. But what I found really interesting, actually researching this episode, researching Alan Cummins, is that he was actually a big contester to be the Doctor. I can't remember if it was Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat, but one of them really wanted to get Alan Cummins to be the Doctor. And Alan Cummins, for a while, was rumoured to be the Doctor, especially after Peter Capaldi left. Especially rumours that he was in talks with the production of BBC and Chris Chibnall. But he turned it down, not because he didn't want the role, not because he wasn't interested, but because they specifically filmed it in Cardiff, and he didn't want to be away from his home, which, if I remember correctly, is in America. He moved to America to get all of these big roles, and that's like literally the only reason he isn't the Doctor. The man's an absolute beast. But he gives so much fun. You can clearly tell he is absolutely loving this role. Maybe a bit too much. Maybe he does give this character a lot of cheese, a lot of wink into the camera, and many scenes of how much flamboyantly he's loving his character. He seems to have an interest in Ryan, which historically it is suspected that he was bisexual. And that plays a lot of into the jokes, because obviously Ryan is straight. And the fact that like he takes, at the start of the story, he takes an interest in Graham as being the witch hunter general, because he is the eldest male of the group, with dismaying the Doctor as the Witchfinders' assistant, and not really seeing her as any sort of equal to her male counterparts. And it starts off as this like humorous joke, and the Doctor does trying to play along with it to begin with, though she is frustrated with it. However, this actually becomes a hindrance to her during the halfway point of the story, where the Doctor gets involved in the investigation of the mud creatures, and these mud creatures resurrect Willa's grandmother, and it seems more prominent than ever that there are witchcraft involved, but the Doctor's trying to convince everybody, no, it's not. Tries to get to Becky Savage to be like, why do you have so much handkerchief, and why do you have so much medical equipment in your bedroom and an axe? You see, you're very well, but strangely prepared for something in your bedroom. But then Becky Savage is just like, you're a witch. I've seen you. You were talking with the demons. You used that witch one thing. You tried to save that witch earlier in the story, and King James sees this, and he's like, yeah, that makes total sense. No other woman would talk like this. No other woman would be this knowledgeable in certain things, and no other woman would ever even like face these demons like this unless they were in league with the demons of some sort. And so, and because the Doctor, not being a male in this incarnation, can't get on with the job, as the Doctor says, is basically accused of being a witch. And that's just very interesting. We've never seen a story like this. This also leads into easily the best scene in the story, in which the Doctor is tied up, but King James comes up to her and is trying to ask her stuff about how the sonic screwdriver works, and how like demons and stuff like that, how they all work. But the Doctor's trying to tell him, it's like, knowledge has to be earned. It's got to be full of respect and dignity towards other people. And the Doctor tied up, and she know, because she knows her history, she tries to use that against King James, talking about his darker side, and specifically his relationship to his mother, being killed so early in his life, because she abandoned him, and also she also decapitated King James's father as well. So he's had a kind of pretty messed up childhood. And the Doctor at one point is just like, King, you use that name to hide behind the darkness inside you. And you think that she's gotten to him. You think it's like, okay, he's going to see. Only for him to strike her back by saying, like, you hide behind the name Doctor. Oh, that's so well. That dialogue is just so well structured there. This is one of those stories, I do state that in Series 11, like most, if not all stories in Series 11, but dialogue is way too much. There's so many dialogue. There's so many scenes where characters are just stating the obvious. Get back, the flames will hurt them. Like, no shit. But like there's just loads of dialogue. It's very strangely structured. And a lot of characters just explain themselves. After Becky Savage basically befriends the Doctor early on in the episode, she goes into this like detail about like how she married into a rich family and then her husband died. And there's like I said, there's a lot of dialogue in this story, especially when when the Doctor is examining the alien mud and this creature possessing Willa's mother or grandmother is like in front of the Doctor, and the Doctor's just like wailing explanations of what's going on. Not really to anyone in particularly, but she's just like explaining everything. And some stuff, it's either pretty obvious or it's something that I think should have been left up to the imagination. Like, is the creatures all one creature, or is it multiple creatures possessing one particularly person, like a hive intelligence per se, or is it like, it's like, there's just so much dialogue. There's just so much dialogue, and I think here it becomes a hindrance. This story has a lot of interesting moments. Ryan gets a lot to do. Actually, Ryan gets like the humour part where King James likes him, and he also gets to talk with King James the most. Graham gets the most laughs, especially when King James gives him the Witchfinders cap on, and Graham just wears it throughout most of the story. And Yaz gets the Yaz out of her. That sounds really strange. Where she is put up with another character, and she's only really there to get explanations and character motivations and character depth out of that character, not really playing an integral role in the narrative, apart from that scene at the start where she basically maybe unintentionally convinces the Doctor to get involved in history. But apart from that, Yaz doesn't really get much to do, and like the story is very interesting up until the scene after the Doctor gets trialed as a witch. She's presumed drowned, only for the thing to come up when King James has said it's been drowned enough, and the Doctor seems to survive because she can hold her breath for longer, and she's very good with knots, specifically chains. And she talks to Becky Savage, who then just goes into like this detail about like she cut down this tree in Pendle Hill, which opened up this gateway to what seemed like Satan at the time, and she got stung by what she believed was Satan, and she became ill. The grandmother character, the mother character, the one accused of witch earlier on in the episode, tried to help her, but couldn't follow up through it. So Becca Savage trialed her the witch just so she can hide the secrets of herself. And then she gets possessed by the villain of the story, the main aliens, the main sci-fi element of the story, the Morax. Here, the narrative, the interest in the story for me drops way down. And it's an absolute shame because I'm really enjoying the story. Jo Wilkinson really shows that she has massive interest in this era, in this time, and really wants to explore the Doctor put out of her element because of her gender at the time, not conforming with how society and the environment that she's going in allows her to be herself, to be this scientific mad lad, mad lass, to just go in and investigate and save people's lives, to get involved in mysteries like this. And it's all great and enjoyment and so far. But then, as soon as this happens, the Morax gets involved. It becomes what a lot of people like think Doctor Who is, where it's this creature with the voice, with the dramatic hand gestures. We will take over the earth and we will take your king. And they like use like strange like sound powers or something to knock all the characters out and kidnap King James, putting him on Pendle Hill. As the Doctor quickly like explains that the tree that she knocked down was part of a alien prison system that has been rotted away and rotting, and putting it in the flame would strengthen it again and put the Morax back in the prison. And this Doctor Who story suddenly becomes a fantasy fighting the alien monster mud things. Yay! As they try to save King James by using the flame. The action scene here isn't very particularly strong. Sally's directing in this story is mainly positive. It's really, really good, especially shots in the forest. There is a art form to shoot in things in forests. If done poorly, if done amateurly, it could just look like anybody's taken a camera and took it in the forest. Forest is surprisingly a very hard thing to shoot professionally. However, Sally's directing here really nails the look and feel of not only like a spooky supernatural forest, but also the time that the story is set in. But when you're on Pendle Hill at the end of that story and it's slightly raining and it's slightly dark, you've got that terrible CGI work on it. The story does kind of feel really flat, as well as the dialogue and the scene setup, and the fact, it just feels really out of place for a story about this particular kind of stuff and trying to take a point. It's like, no, these things aren't real. You are killing people, innocent people, because you are greedy, or because you are selfish, or because you're trying to hide something. Like, this story is interested in explaining this dark aspect of real life human history. And then all of a sudden it abandons all that for a typical monster smash up. And it's very short and it's not particularly strong. You can clearly tell that there must have been like a note somewhere. It's like, right, this has got to be a pseudo. You can't have a pure historical. This has to be a pseudo historical. And Joe Wilkinson just wrote it. I was like, oh yeah, okay. Oh wow, look at all of this pure historical stuff. Oh, and the pseudo stuff is there. It's a similar thing which happened with Rosa and with Demons of the Punjab. Each 3 stories, I think, would have been a much, much better story if they were pure historicals instead of pseudo-historicals. That's just my opinion. And I think this one the most suffers from it. Where the other 2, the sci-fi elements, do at least have a interest, do at least have a purpose within the narrative, to the point where it's like, it has to talk about the themes that the stories are actually talking about, even if it's very loose or just feels very out of place. They are connected to those themes. Here, however, apart from, tying into the narrative that there is this mysterious things going around in the small village, thematically, not only does it go against like the whole theme and ideas of the story, but like, no, it just goes completely against them, because the story then goes, yes, okay, there are sort of demons and witches and stuff that you do need to like go and fight and kill, and pure evil does kind of exist and stuff. Though, yeah, the story does kind of end on a note where that's kind of like a somber, not kind of somber, but like essentially King James gets really proud of the fact that he burns and locks up what remains of Becca Savage's like possessed body. Presumably she died during the events of her being possessed by the Morax. And the Doctor's King James is very proud of himself for that, and the Doctor doesn't like that at all, and is very disappointed in him, and is very angry at him. As a great bit at the end of the story as well, where Graham is quoting, and King James thinks it's something to do, I think it's the Bible, to which Graham replies, it's like Quentin Tarantino. I absolutely love that line. But like the actual science, say, alien element of the story, really what hinders this story for me. And so that is the Witchfinders. Overall, this story has a lot of potential. It has a lot of great moments, which makes me really enjoy the story. Because the story is mainly focused on these elements I really do like, I do consider this a really great story. And the dealings with King James the First or Sixth, depending on if you're in Scotland or not, and the Doctor's gender being actually a part of the story, which hinders her from from solving the mystery and puts her at risk, and a lot of great moments with Ryan and Graham. And just the setting, the environments, really well done, really well executed. However, the sci-fi elements, when they kick in, when the Morax is revealed as to be the main threat, the story loses all of its potential and loses all of its what makes this story so interesting. The last act of this story, though short, really does ruin the effect the story has on people. And I think that because of that, it stops me from thinking the story isn't... Because I think the story would have been one of my favourite... would have been my favourite Jodie Whittaker story if it wasn't for that last act. I was really enjoying it, probably even more than Rosa and Demons of the Punjab, which that is a compliment. However, that last act really hinders this narrative for me, and I think that this might be the weakest story in Series 11 so far. Maybe just like in the... It's easily in like one of my least favourite Jodie Whittaker stories, even though it has some really great moments and some really great narratives. And like I said, I do enjoy this story. I do really like this story. It's just that the final act really bugs me down. And as well as Yaz being the typical Yaz that Series 11 presents us, which is a really big disappointment. But our cast do very well. Seeing Alan Cummins as Doctor Who is just so surreal, and he's absolutely loving every bit of it. Jodie Whittaker's a star as always. Bradley Walsh, Talshin Cole, Amanda Gill are great as always. Yeah, it's just really that last act specifically, and all the other sci-fi elements, when it's talking about the mud, really do hinder the story. But apart from that, I think this is a really good story, and I really do recommend it. So anyway, that's the Witchfinders. So join me next time when the Doctor and crew go to modern-day Norway as they discover a mystery surrounding a seemingly abandoned house with a blind girl at the epicenter of a mysterious creature loaming the forest. Or is there something more to the story? So join me next time for It Takes You Away, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra!